respects to elders past and present. Always was.
Always will be.
Aboriginal land. We acknowledge that we're on the land of Warrior Pumaway, the resting place of activist journalist Juanita Nielsen and the birthplace of the Builders Labourers Federation's Green Bands. Action for Public Housing has called this rally Homes for People Not for Profit because we are in one of the worst housing crises this country has ever seen. And both state and federal ALP government's plans are set to make this crisis worse. The federal government's Housing Future Fund aims to fund homes for just 12% of the 160,000 households on the public housing waiting list. Shame. We don't need a future fund. We need a fund for the present, for the here and now.
And this morning's $2 billion announcement from our PM, Anthony Albanese, for rapid social housing expansion is nowhere near enough. Labor is running away from the platform that they were elected on. It is utterly shameful that any mention of housing as a human right has been struck from their new policy platform, when we know that secure, safe and affordable housing enables people, regardless of personal circumstance, to live with dignity. Labor's capitulation is indicative of a crisis of legitimacy this party is facing. In the context of $500 billion going towards AUKUS nuclear submarines and the $30 billion stage 3 tax cuts to the rich, the proposed $2 billion for social, not public housing is a drop in the ocean. And state Labor have broken their promise, their pre-election promise, promise to freeze the sale of public housing and have instead declared the demolition of Waterloo South, 82 Wentworth Park Road, Glebe, and South Everleigh public housing estates. Shame. Despite Rose Jackson's assertion that they will consult tenants over 82 Wentworth Park Road's future, Labor have instead announced to the media today that they will continue with demolition plans despite the 6-day occupation staged by brave residents and supporters. Shame. We can't solve a housing crisis by demolishing public housing. Shame, Labor, shame.
Thanks, Ishbel. And to give context to this crisis and give a proper acknowledgement to country, let's welcome renowned warrior woman Lorna Munro. Lorna Munro, or Yilini, is a Wiradjuri and Gamilaroi woman, multidisciplinary artist and regular radio and podcast host at Radio Skid Row. A long-time active member of her Redfern Waterloo community, her work is informed by her passion and well-studied insights in areas such as history, politics and popular culture. Lorna is the sole designer and creator of Sydney's and possibly Australia's first initiative to teach Aboriginal language through poetry in partnership with Red Room Poetry. Welcome, Lorna!
Hello, how are we all? My name's Lorna Munro. As Comrade Rachel so kindly introduced me to you all. I'm a Wiradjuri Gomeroi poet and podcaster. I'm also a lifelong member of the Redfern Waterloo community. I'm a presenter of a very interesting little project called Survival Guide, a podcast about gentrification in Redfern and Waterloo. And I think over the years that's become a bit of a resource for people to really understand what gentrification looks like, how to survive it, based on how our people have survived the earlier iterations of gentrification. We all know it as colonisation. There's a lot to learn from Aboriginal people in this country, and the longer that we refuse to acknowledge all of their momentums, all of their struggles, all of the things that we've been able to do for ourselves in this survival against the colony, I think people have a lot to learn from that, and they're only going to miss out by denying that in this country. Speaking of this country, we are standing on Gadigal land. I cannot welcome you to a country that is not my own, but I invite you to acknowledge this country with us and acknowledge this country every day when you walk it. And don't forget that you stand on stolen land and act accordingly. Now, just to give a little bit of context to where we stand, this place, Town Hall, was actually one of the first cemeteries for the convicts who were worked to death just further on down the road at the Rocks. Worked to get to death quarrying sandstone to build these big, great buildings that adorn the city today. Sandstone for our people, especially Gadigal people, saltwater people, sandstone is extremely important. And apparently there were 100 carvings destroyed from here to Botany Road in order to build George Street. I start off with that just to kind of give you this pattern that has existed in this country. And again, the reason why everyone needs to learn from our survival is that if you know anything about Sydney and the country at large, you know that there's a whole cycle of moving people on, you know, which is happening today. Basically, colonisation feeds off moving people on. It originally was powered by Aboriginal blood, guts and bones. Now gentrification is a threat to all of us. Gentrification is colonisation. The tools have not changed, they just have different policy names. Redfern is a very, very specific, interesting place to look at with how colonisation has existed in that place and how the Redfern community, the black iconic community that everybody knows Redfern for, has survived in that place and will continue to survive in that place, because as long as there's Aboriginal faces in Redfern, colonisation has not been successful. The thing that you need to understand about Redfern is that there's been specific strategies concocted in that place that has become successful strategy to roll out into every urban community after it. It is the testing ground. It always has been the testing ground. Sydney is the testing ground for everything in this country. So if you can understand the patterns of the colonial monsters' behaviours here in this country, you might be able to arm yourself. Back in the 60s, Redfern's significant because it had a population up to 60,000 people. Today we have 300 Aboriginal people left. And that is because of moving and selling of public housing. Aboriginal people make up majority of the population in the area. It is the reason why all of these things were set up in this community. Now, the thing that I need people to really understand is one of the things that has opened up Redfern to these corporates and privatisation has been the criminalisation of Aboriginal children and people, culminating in the death of TJ Hickey, who was chased by police to his death in Redfern. Now, after that happened, I don't know if anybody else noticed, but there was a federal body established in Redfern, Waterloo, that superseded all local government. It was called the Redfern Waterloo Authority. And it dealt in the purchasing and selling of stolen goods, stolen land. So that body was set up to address antisocial behaviour. In the time that that federal organisation has controlled the area, there has been not 1 cent spent on anything to do with any social cohesion in the community. It has all been spent on buying and selling land. So when we talk about the levels of privatisation where we're at the moment, Redfern is a really good place to track it back to. And the ways that that community has been levelled has been destroying Aboriginal children, destroying Aboriginal families first and foremost, destroying everything that a community needs and families need to function and thrive. So if we get rid of all of the public schools in the area, what do you think happens next? The families follow. So if you want to destroy a community, you get rid of all the public housing, you get rid of all of the things that a community needs. Schools, medical centres, all of these things. The most nefarious thing about it all is the stigmatisation of Aboriginal children. The way a colony works is literally feeding off child labour. All colonies everywhere, children are the first to be worked to death, stigmatised, violence, all of these things. Children are always the first, the most vulnerable in that situation. And in Redfern and Waterloo community, I really need people to understand in the way that they have come through and levelled that community is by criminalisation of Aboriginal children and stigmatising the whole community. So I don't have much more to say. Go and listen to Survival Guide if you really want to listen to a comprehensive timeline and keep up to date with the things that Rachel and all these mob are doing, because not many people are talking about it. And not many people are talking about the fact that this has all happened under the Prime Minister that's literally sold to the rest of us that he's one of us, that he grew up in public housing. And I think you can't forget that. Thank you.
Save Waterloo! Yes, we can! Save Waterloo!
Yes, we can!
Save Waterloo!
Yes, we can!
Save Waterloo!
Yes, we can!
Well, thank you so much, Lorna. And also big thanks to Jenny Munro in the role that Jenny's played at the Block and in Redfern and Waterloo. Your leadership has helped save Waterloo and Redfern from the worst effects of social cleansing, and we all pledge to carry on your resistance legacy. And look, I know that Lorna and others in Waterloo have had serious issues with maintenance in their homes, and Action for Public Housing is organising a campaign to double the amount spent on maintenance to $1 billion in New South Wales to stop what we have, a demolition by neglect strategy. And that will end this bullying by the Department of Community and Justice to housing tenants like Lorna. So give it up for Lorna, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorna. Housing is a human right, and privatising public land, demolishing public housing, and allowing landlords to jack up prices and leave houses empty is a landlord's dream. But for renters, women over 55, casually employed workers, the homeless and students, this is a nightmare. Our next speaker is Carolyn Iena, who is a public housing tenant standing strong against this nightmare. A rapper, they are active in Hands Off Glebe and Action for Public Housing, and are fighting tooth and nail to save their home at 82 Wentworth Park Road in Glebe. They led the occupation at Wentworth Park Road last week and to end plans to demolish their home and instead repair, refurbish and renovate it. Give it up for Carolyn.
Hi everybody, my pronouns are they, them. I've been a public housing tenant for 30 years and I'm in the estate 82 Wentworth Park Road, Glebe. And I knew straight away when I was told that they were going to survey the property for possible redevelopment back only last year that it was because of gentrification and colonisation. I had seen all these different buildings being taken down over a period of time around me. I'd seen what's happening in Redfern, and you know, the new Pyrmont Fish Market that no one really needs. It's just a tourist thing, and I live the closest to that new construction that's happening. That wasn't even going to go ahead before COVID happened, and then all of a sudden it was accelerated to the fore, and now we've got this new Pyrmont Fish Market happening. No one's going to benefit from it. And it's the same thing with my estate. When they demolish the estate that I live in, no one in my community is going to benefit from the so-called new building. It's going to be probably affordable housing, and what the sorry is that? I mean, it's ambiguous, right? Affordable housing is not affordable to most people. It's really disgusting. And so they sell it as one thing, but it's really not that thing that they're calling it. The only model that works is public housing. Public housing is affordable housing. Public housing is community housing. You know, we don't need all these little separate social housing terms under that umbrella. We just need public housing. So, anyway, so we, as the previous person spoke about, we had an occupation where I'm living. And it was really good because, you know, I got to discuss things that I normally don't get to discuss with people. I felt supported. And that's not something normally I feel living there because of basically Department of Community Justices. What the hell is that name? And that, you know, it's a vicious cycle. Department of Community Justices is just there to criminalise people. It's part of the jail system, it's part of DOCS, it's part of so many other things that just criminalise people, especially First Nations people. I mean, in every step of any of these things, First Nations people are the most impacted. And anyway, so yeah, as I said, I've lived there for 30 years. I've developed a community. I've never had that before. I'm 60 years old. I've never had a community really until this. And several people have died. It is simply disgusting that people would feel that their life is so bad that they don't want to live anymore. And also during the relocation process, one of my neighbours was moved out last year and he became a lot more stressed. He had a lot more falls and ended up having aggressive brain cancer. And every step of the way I've been there for him. I've taken on the cat that he was the second owner of. The first owner died last year. Yes, he had a long-term addiction issue, but I believe that this process of what they're doing to us is what's caused their deaths. Just prior to the announcement, another neighbour committed suicide, and I believe he probably knew what was coming, and he was a very traumatised person, as is most of the tenants that are there now and the tenants that have been moved out already. There's been a lot of bullying and gaslighting through this process towards me, other tenants. So when the occupation happened, I was so pleased, but unfortunately Rose Jackson has made some very wishy-washy statements, and until the DA is pulled and we see actual change as in the documents, then I will not believe a thing that she said. You know, she's been to the building. I showed her around the building before the election. We had a table discussion as well with other public housing tenants from Waterloo, Solidarity to Waterloo, and anybody else that is subject to this disgusting displacement. And, you know, public housing should be for everyone. What else was I going to talk about? And this Communities Plus bullcrap. One of the first things I said to the relocation person who had on their business card Communities Plus, I said, "Oh, you mean Communities Minus?" I mean, how dare they have on a business card Communities Plus when you're breaking communities? I mean, it's a very real thing, and especially as a marginalised person, I've got a disability as well. I may look all great and everything, but, you know, that's how I came into public housing, because I have a disability. I grew up in private. I know the difference. And, you know, they just take advantage of people. And, you know, so for the students that are struggling to get housing in the city, for the workers that are struggling to get housing in the city, everybody should be able to have public housing. It's a model that's worked in many countries. Some countries have 100% public housing. Some countries have about 80% public housing. It should be something that's extended and defended. You know, refurbish our properties, sure, because they haven't been maintained adequately in all the years that I've been there. And yeah, keep fighting, everyone. We've got to get this changed.
Thanks so much, Caroline. And the hands-off bleed table here, if people can go over and sign the letter petition to save Wentworth Park Road, that'd be great. And look, I was fortunate to be part of last week's 6-day occupation, and unless Housing Minister Rose Jackson backs away from demolition plans, we are all resolved to go back and reoccupy 82 Wentworth Park Road to save it from demolition. Save Wentworth Park? Yes, we can. Save Wentworth Park?
Yes, we can.
Save Wentworth Park?
Yes, we can.
Save Wentworth Park?
Yes, we can.
Woohoo! All right, next we have another Dynamo community organiser, activist, housing tenant, Karen Brown from Waterloo. Karen has been a key leader, housing tenant in the successful to date 8-year-long battle to stave off the Meriton Diacorp Mirvac assault on their community. She's a public housing tenant, member of Action for Public Housing, Waterloo Public Housing Action Group, Waterloo Neighbourhood Advisory Body and Human Services Committee. Give it up for Karen.
Hi everyone, thank you all for coming. Okay, so I live in Waterloo. I do pay rent, by the way, 25% of my income. I've lived there for over 30 years. We're in the middle of the worst housing crisis in history, in anyone's memory, and demolition makes no sense. Removing hundreds of homes from existing stock makes no sense. We need more housing now, not in 15 years. Resources and labour should go to repairing and rehabilitating existing buildings and building more on already vacant land, not into evictions and demolitions. Our climate and our planet are also in a crisis, and we desperately need to reduce emissions and to cut waste. We have stopped sending so many containers and shopping bags to landfill. It's time we stop doing the same with perfectly good buildings and sending them to landfill. Existing public housing can be expanded and existing services can be expanded alongside. That's a much better idea than starting from scratch in new locations with different demographics. In Waterloo, over the decades, particular needs of the very, very diverse community have been identified and met through the hard work and dedication of many, including NGOs, academics, volunteers, and even governments. all of this will be obliterated. Every trace of us will be scraped off and replaced with just buildings. Supply, 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 we are told, will make housing more available and affordable. Well, it hasn't so far. Housing developers build for profit, not livability, and they will not flood the market with new housing because they don't want prices to fall. Enough of them planning our city to satisfy their greed. And they do not need incentives to give us 15% affordable housing for 15 years only. They've got enough incentive in the profits they make. How about we make unaffordable housing 15 years only and then revert it to public housing? There are 1 million empty properties in Australia. Rules need to be made to ensure that they are made available. A tax on long-term vacancies is one way, and a ban on anyone with untenanted properties from buying any more. I am not an NIMBY, I'm not against progress. There is room for more housing in Waterloo by repairing and adding to existing homes. Action for Public Housing will hold a forum on this approach on the 18th of July at the Redfern Community Centre and online. We've got leaflets around, follow us online. Anyone who thinks Waterloo is a done deal and we should just give up, imagine this. Think of the place you lived in for the longest time and all the familiar things in the neighbourhood, places and people. Imagine you were told that you and 80 of your nearest neighbours will be shoved aside because someone else wants to live there, that you are to be cleared out for a building site. Times that by 10 and you have South Waterloo. It is offensive and mean and a very bad idea. So we will keep fighting to save Waterloo. Stay with us in that fight. Join us, believe in people power and save Waterloo.
We'll save Waterloo.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Save Waterloo!
Yes, we can!
Save Waterloo!
Yes, we can!
Save Waterloo!
Yes, we can!
Woohoo! Before I keep going, I just was asked to direct people just over here to buy a t-shirt. If anyone wants a Save Waterloo t-shirt, this is one way you can support. And with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Kristen O'Connell. Kristen is an anti-poverty activist and unwaged social policy researcher relying on the Disability Support Pension. She established the Anti-Poverty Centre in 2021 with other welfare recipients to counter problems with politicians, academics, paid advocates and others in the political class making harmful decisions on behalf of the people they purport to represent. Kristen was critical to the occupation of Wentworth Park Road, and like Sydney University SRC, the Anti-Poverty Centre have joined Action for Public Housing to co-organise today's rally. Give it up for Kristen!
Thanks folks, and obviously before I start, acknowledging we're here on stolen country and extend my respect to elders here, elders across the continent. There is no housing justice without First Nations justice, and there is certainly no First Nations justice without land back. The things that we allow governments to do to us here, tearing down public housing, socially cleansing communities of black folks, of those of us on the lowest incomes, is what enables them to get away with what they're doing to folks in remote communities, forcing them to live in unsafe homes, overcrowded homes, and ultimately forcing people off country. It's shameful. So this morning, the Prime Minister announced a pitiful $2 billion for social housing, not public housing, no commitment to Aboriginal controlled housing either. $2 billion is nothing. There is not a dollar, oh, I've already said that. So this week, some folks might have missed the fact that we learned the Reserve fucking Bank building is going to be refurbished for $500 million. And we're getting $2 billion for social housing. We're going to get $500 million a year maybe, except not really, if the government pushes ahead with its housing fund. And that's not going to deliver returns for quite some time. So again, we're being left behind. $2 billion. Those Those of us who rely on Centrelink to survive are being used as a money laundering device to funnel $15 billion a year through the welfare system into landlords' pockets, private landlords' pockets, to specify. There is another $13 billion a year being thrown away on negative gearing and on discounts for capital gains tax when private landlords cash out on their investments. So the people who need it most are getting $2 billion one time. The New South Wales Labor Party went to the election running an anti-privatisation agenda. They talked a big game on public housing, but now, despite their promises, as we've heard from Carolyn, as we've heard from Karen, as we've heard from Lorna, people are being kicked out of public homes despite the fact that they were told this would not happen. Shame. So, tenants at Wentworth Park Road are being kicked out, and this morning the Housing Minister, after being given alternatives, has shown that she is committed to pushing ahead with that plan. There is no excuse for knocking down homes in a housing crisis, particularly not public homes. The Minister knows as well as we do this is not value for money. They will spend $22 million on public funds. That's $850,000 per bedroom for the extra 26 bedrooms that they want to get on that site, and they don't even have to buy the land. $860,000 per bedroom. So, Rose Jackson, why are you pushing ahead with the Coalition's plan to demolish 82 Wentworth Park Road? You know there are alternatives that would deliver more homes for that much money. Last week, as you heard, we carried out an occupation, and we will certainly be back in that building, occupying it again if we do not see a change from Rose Jackson. So, across the road from those empty homes, currently 15 empty homes on that site, there are folks sleeping rough under the bridge in Wentworth Park. The City of Sydney cannot even leave toilets open overnight so that folks have somewhere to use the bathroom. It is shameful. The easiest possible thing to do to support folks who have no other supports. So our message to government is affordable housing is unaffordable. Community housing is not public housing. Do not subject more people to charities who cherry-pick the most desirable tenants and place unreasonable, onerous, cruel restrictions on people's lives. The Albanese government must redirect funds from landlords to those of us who on the lowest incomes, directly invest in public homes. The Minns government must deliver on its anti-privatisation promises, ensure 100% of public land that's used for homes is used for public homes only, stop knocking down public homes. Black folks, queer folks, disabled folks, people who've been incarcerated and welfare recipients are the ones who are most discriminated against in the private rental market, although I would say students and parents are also having a pretty rough fucking time. This city cannot be left to the rich. Housing should not be a commodity, it should not be for profit, and the only sustainable solution to this housing crisis that will last into the future is a dramatic expansion of public housing, ensure that every person who wants one has access to a quality, beautiful public home. Thanks, folks.
Give it up for Kristen! Our next speaker would have been Vince Ashton, who was a retired CFMEU member and was a member and organiser in the Builders Labourers Federation from the 1950s to the 1970s. As we know, the BLF were critical to the green bans of the 70s, which brought social responsibility to the forefront of unionist minds. The green bans were critical in tying the struggle of unionists and of workers to the fight for a better world through their militant protection of heritage buildings, many of which I suppose were public housing, and in doing so help innumerable communities wrecked by corporate greed. I'd like to give a quick shout out to the our union comrades who are here with us today, and for also the ones who have helped us in organising this rally, including the New South Wales National Tertiary Education Union, the Australian Unemployed Workers Union, and the New South Wales Tenants Union. Unfortunately, Vince can't be with us today as he is sick and is at the doctor's. So we have Andrew, who is the president of Friends of Erskineville, to read out Vince and the CFMEU retired response to the federal ALP's housing plan.
So this is a letter to the Prime Minister, and it says, "Dear Prime Minister, without malice, we, the CFMEU retired members, are aware that public housing has declined alarmingly over the past decade. when governed appallingly by the Liberal National Party. However, 80% of Australians surveyed do not agree with your vague policy to provide public housing to those who most need it, especially when it was revealed that 67% of politicians have invested in 3 or more properties for the purpose of negative gearing. A policy which economists and a sceptical public believe to be responsible for soaring rents. It has been suggested that the National Housing Future Fund has to rely on stock market exchange investment, whereas a profit needs to be secured before houses begin to be built, leaving the homeless destitute for a roof over their head now. This method does not seem logical to us. The people of mainland states and territories of Australia have trusted the Australian Labor Party to govern according to their social conscience and to do whatever it takes as soon as possible, which should be to negotiate with the crossbench to provide public and affordable housing for those in need now, rather than make it an issue at the next election while the number of homeless and destitute increases. Prime Minister, it is difficult for us to comprehend you promising tax cuts to the wealthy and not finding a fairer solution for the homeless and destitute. You promised this during your campaign to get elected. Prime Minister, the CFMEU retired members request you negotiate with the crossbench to change the current policy and provide a solution that will be amicable to everybody.
Thank you, CFMEU retired New South Wales. Vince and the CFMEU retired want us to organise a public housing summit with other organisations across the country to plan the next steps to fight to build beautiful public housing for all, not just the vulnerable. And if you're interested, come and talk to us after the rally. We've got 2 more speakers, folks, and then we're going to go for an energising march. We've got Jenny Leong next, who is the member for Newtown and Green spokesperson for housing, renters' rights and homelessness. As the Greens housing spokesperson, Jenny has led campaigns for renters' rights to stop sell-offs of public land and supported people navigating the complex and dysfunctional public housing system in New South Wales. Welcome, Jenny!
Thank you very much, Rachel, and massive shout out to Action for Public Housing and everybody that has joined together to march and join and rally today for housing justice here in New South Wales and across the country. I would like to begin, as we always begin, by acknowledging that we are here on unceded land that was stolen and colonised, and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded, and express my public support for Lydia Thorpe, Senator last night in the Federal Parliament, who attempts to confirm that sovereignty in our national legislation in the recognition of the Voice to Parliament legislation, and express my personal disgust at the fact that not another senator in that chamber backed her in her attempt to confer sovereignty in relation to the Voice legislation. When we are talking about the idea of public housing on public land, can I say this? It is not public land, it is not Crown land, it is First Nations land, and that land was stolen and never ceded. And so if anyone is determining at what should happen in relation to public land and public housing right now, it should be our First Nations people. We heard from Lorna the complete disgraceful displacement of First Nations people from Redfern and Waterloo, and that will continue with the demolition and destruction of the Waterloo public housing estate. We know that the ongoing destruction and devastation of our public housing is just another way to ensure that Sydney becomes a playground for the rich and uber wealthy. We are accused of being NIMBYs. We are accused of always saying, no, not in my backyard. Well, it's not their fucking backyard. It's the First Nations people backyard, and they stand in solidarity with the need to protect the fact that public housing remains in our city. And what I say is this: if our governments really want to act on the idea of delivering more density for our city to address the housing crisis, then I think they should have a look at what kind of homes they should be demolishing. I don't think it's 82 Wentworth Avenue. I don't think it's Waterloo. I think you could probably look a little bit east to the likes of the 7, however many million mansion that sits there that Mike Cannon-Brookes owns, or one of the other large, amazing properties that are there, because they're not struggling from homelessness, they're not at risk of homelessness, so why not demolish and acquire one of their homes and build some high-density public housing on that land? But somehow we don't do that, because somehow the concept of private land and private home ownership is put over and above the idea of people having a safe, secure, affordable, accessible and a sustainable place to live. Somehow the likes of the uber wealthy that own hundreds of millions of dollars of mansions, the people that own holiday homes throughout this state and around this country, the people that make profit from the crisis in the rental market right now, are put as a higher priority than women who are currently sleeping in cars, than people that are currently sleeping rough in the middle of winter in tents. Apparently, we care more about their profits on their property investments than we do about the fact that children have nowhere to live in this city, in this state and in this country. And I am sickened to my core when I hear the Prime Minister talk about the fact that he grew up in public housing. Because every day, we hear stories of devastation that are occurring and trauma that is occurring because of failed lack of maintenance and respect of the dignity of people living in public housing. Because we know that state and federal governments have refused to put in the funding needed. And so today we get an announcement. $2 billion. Sounds like a lot, right? Unless you look at how much a submarine costs. Unless you look at how much the stage 3 tax cuts cost. Well, can I just say that it's better than nothing. But what will it deliver? And what do the Greens want to see? What we want to see is $2.5 billion committed every year to invest in public and affordable housing. And when we say affordable housing, we don't talk about some wishy-washy concept of affordable housing. We talk about affordable housing being something that is a 25% or less of people's income, and that the housing cost is set to people's income, not to some arbitrary market value set by the likes of the private property market. And when we hear the fudging of the term social housing or diverse housing or community housing, we say bullshit to that. What we want is public housing in public hands delivering for the community. We also know that everyone is stressed in a rental crisis right now, and so I'm pleased to say that now that we have managed to stop the New South Wales government from introducing rental auctions, which who the fuck thought we would have to deal with that fight, we are now going to move forward with our bill to introduce an immediate rent freeze in New South Wales. I will be introducing that bill in this sitting of Parliament in the coming fortnight, and I urge you all to step up the pressure on Labor to say that there is no excuse. There is no excuse to not support that in the middle of a rental crisis. We know that freezing rents is not the only solution, but we cannot have a situation where landlords continue to profit from the private rental market crisis while we are waiting for people to end unfair no-grounds evictions, to deliver on the public housing that we need and address the homelessness crisis in this state. We do not want to see more people evicted to homelessness. I end on this. I want to offer my absolute thanks and respect to the people that have been building the action for public housing and grassroots actions that have taken place. I want to retrospectively offer my solidarity to the incredible occupation that occurred in the last week in Glebe and thank those activists for being there. I acknowledge the Deputy Mayor, Green Sylvia Elsmore, that was there standing in solidarity, our councillor in the Inner West Councillor, Liz Atkins, and recognise the fact that as Greens, we know that our power does not sit in the Parliament or in the halls of the council chambers. We know that our purpose and our voice is to represent the community and the activists on the street. I urge you to hold us to account in pushing that. But I say to you this as a final thing. Everything seems impossible until it happens. 2 weeks ago, federal Labor was saying that there was no more money in the budget to deliver for public and social housing. Today, the Prime Minister announces $2 billion. 5 years ago, the New South Wales Labor Party said there's no way they could end no grounds evictions. At the end of last year, they made a commitment to deliver on it if they formed government, and it will happen by the end of the year. We know that there was no chance to be able to see that there would ever be a future where we got rid of the Liberal National Government's agenda when it comes to the demolition of public housing homes. Just because the Minister says today she's planning to go ahead does not mean that it cannot be stopped. Because we together collectively are winning this struggle to make sure we protect public housing in our city, and we are committed to the idea of freezing rents, to stopping the sell-off and demolition of public housing, and making sure that we are seeing real money invested in the delivery of more public housing into the future, because there is no excuse for anyone to be sleeping in a car or a tent when we are a wealthy country and we are delivering billions of dollars in tax concessions to the uber wealthy. Thank you very much. I'm Jenny Leong. It's wonderful being here. Solidarity with you all.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. There are 100,000 empty private homes in New South Wales. When we were at 82 Wentworth Park Road, there were people sleeping rough across the road from a public housing facility that only had 3 tenants of 300 places left.
Shame.
That is shameful. We need to repatriate these private homes, these empty homes,
Yes.
and give these 57,000 people on the public housing wait list a home. Housing is a human right. Next, we have Khan Tran, who is an arts law student at Sydney University SRC, also at the Sydney University SRC. They are also the SRC Disability Officer, former editor of On Histoire, and international student ambassador for the City of Sydney. Sorry. They have helped organise protests on climate mitigation and LGBTQ+ equality. And just want to give a quick shout out to the youth at SRC once again, and the National Union of Students Get a Room campaign. We know that the struggle for safe and affordable housing is one that students care about because it is one that they routinely face, especially as the only homes that are afforded by the university cost thousands of dollars a year and harbour a deep and misogynistic culture of violence. Give it up for Khan.
Okay, so my name is Khan and I'm one of the current disabilities officers at the University of Sydney SRC, and I'm also an international student. I'd like to first pay acknowledgement and respect to that the land that we are standing on is unceded and stolen Gadigal land. This housing and cost of living crisis affect not only domestic students and my peers, but also acutely on not only myself, but also the international students, the millions of international students in the country right now. Amidst this crisis, many of us have no options but to rent, and especially to those who are new students, but to rent expensive beds provided by for-profit providers like Scape, Unilodge, and WeHer, and many others. Many of these rooms cost regularly north of $500. There is one in Darling, near Darling Square, that costs $700 at minimum. And that's more than the elitist residential colleges at USyd alone. They thrive on making sure that we pay and milk each and every cent out of us. The international education sector loves to peddle and then repeat the claim that the international student education sector brings $40 billion to the country a year. The country's 5th or 4th largest export, depending on the year you're talking about. But this 40 billion odd figure is made out of hard-earned money that our families invest in, and a sector setting us up for exorbitant rent and overcharging us at each available opportunity. We are not walking dollar signs, even if governments actually love doing so. They sometimes look at us in a very condescending way. I remember last year during an international student conference when a very famous, actually, politician in Sydney, I won't name who, but they said something along the lines of, to a room full of international students, it was actually an international student welcome orientation event, where they said something along this line. They were complimenting our English skills. They were saying, "Oh, I'm surprised that the cohorts. I'm an international student ambassador. I'm surprised that your English is so good." It was casual, another moment of casual racism, seeing us as walking dollar signs, and I urge that government, I wish that the state government, the federal government, everyone in the entire sector to just stop seeing us as walking dollar signs, because it is not just on the way they see international students, it's the way they see everyone. They see everyone as having to produce that extra profit in order to gain something, in order to be deserving of something. I call that bullshit, to be very honest. I call that bullshit, to be honest. None of us deserve to be treated that way. And I would like to also touch on one topic that others who have spoken on, which is gentrification, especially in Redfern and Indigenous land. Expensive private purpose-built student accommodation is booming and exploding like never before, especially in Redfern. Multiple projects, 600 rooms, each of them costing something again, like $500 north, making and disadvantaging at the detriment of not only us, international students, but also to residents around there, because $500 is a lot of money, and it is setting up for stress and further cost of living stress. And I'd like to touch on one more thing, which is that it's no coincidence that universities in this city are so elitist. No university in this city, except for one, as I'm aware of, Western Sydney University, have public school intakes above 20%. It's no coincidence. With costs and rents this high, students who come from rural, regional, and anywhere outside of New South Wales, if you don't already live in Sydney, you're priced out of this city. You're priced out of getting a quality education at our major universities here. USyd, where I study, is among the third or the fourth worst in terms of public school intake. UNDA, UNSW, you name it. It's basically, with the cost of living and rental prices, it is pushing low SAS students and regional students and rural students out of our universities. Minister Jason Clare loves to talk about how to get and wanting to get more low SAS students and disabled students into our best universities. Well, how do you do that? When there is an acute cost of living crisis, if you have piecemeal packages for students, that will not be enough. That will never be enough, because that elitism is baked right into the way that we live and have to struggle every single day. And finally, I want to touch on one thing that is the deeply flawed, to say least, real estate development industry. The construction and real estate development industry is might enforce a deep ethical disaster of its own. In New South Wales, I like to touch on cladding just as a small example. I actually used to live in London 6 years ago, and I remember crying on the night that Grenfell Tower happened because a friend of mine lost someone in that fire. Yet in New South Wales in 2022, the latest figures that were available, just 40% of our buildings, just 40% out of 1,200 buildings under local council jurisdiction identified as either at-risk because of dodgy cladding, have so far been fixed or been identified as low risk. That is appallingly low. There are residents in this city living in often high density buildings that have flammable cladding. But the cladding, I raised the cladding issue just as one example because there are lots more. Lack of maintenance, lack of care, unless you're wealthy. It is deep. It is like an iceberg. There are so much deeper in that iceberg.
And I like to say that even if I like to, I guess, echo what Jenny Leong said before about things seemingly look impossible, but actions and activism and action like this, I think, are so deeply valuable and meaningful, because we're pushing politicians and governments who thrive, literally, on turning a blind eye away, and in actions, just like on planning, just like on public housing policy. But as long as we fight on and keep pushing and shouting, we will get something back. We will get there. And I like to say that because like 6 years ago when I was in London, in Grenfell, years before that, residents had a blog that no mainstream media ever picked on, warning about the danger signs. That's just one example. And actions like this, community voices like this, is so important, because you guys are basically the knowledge and institutional knowledge about housing, your own experiences. So I like to end on that, and I like to call on, again, echo calls for freezing rents and affordable rooms and beds for not only students, but for everyone in the city. And finally, we need to get to do something about university management, but that's something else.
And to all our speakers today, another round of applause! Before we march off, we want to again congratulate our brave tenants and activists who occupied 82 Wentworth Park Road for 6 days. And to give solidarity to those battling to defeat the demolition of Barrack Beacon in Port Melbourne and Naarm. So huddle around, I know it's cold, but just huddle around. We're going to get a little video going just in solidarity with those at Barrack Beacon and the two other, Margaret Kelly and the two other brave tenants who are standing strong against bulldozers in their home. There used to be 300 people in that estate, yet the Victorian ALP government is demolishing it as we speak. That's why we demand nationwide that public housing not be sold off, let alone amidst a housing crisis. So yeah, gather around. I'm going to do a little bit of a chant. See how this goes. Save Barrack Beacon! Yes, we can! Save